Good
Greetings,
evening.
Paul. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the very first episode of the Oz Katerji Show. Sorry, I'm still learning how to use this technology, but it's a learning process for us all.
It's
Um,
great.
so yeah, look, let's dive right into it. Let me just double check the chat here. Not as a heavy of a question, but I used to follow you closely on Twitter before I deleted it in January. Coverage of Ukraine, especially in the early days, was so valued. I recently joined Blue Sky, but I've noticed there doesn't seem to be as much activity, especially from OSINT accounts. Why do you think that is? So before I go to Paul, I'll just say I think that's because all of the other people are still on Twitter. And when news breaks, people jump to Twitter. They don't jump to Blue Sky yet. And until that happens, it's difficult for me to fully jump over. I know Blue Sky users are like, well, you need to be the one that moves over to make it doesn't work that way, because Blue Sky might be popular in the UK and the United States, but Syrians, Ukrainians, a lot of other people aren't necessarily posting on it. So the news that happens as and when I get is I'm quicker. Twitter's still quicker for that. Anyway, Paul. So look, Labour's going through some struggles at the moment. The economic situation is still tough. We all knew it would be tough going in. There's a lot of pushback at the moment over this, over the cuts to disabled benefits and disability benefits, and there's also not a lot of attention being paid to the areas where Labour is investing more heavily. They're kind of damned if they do and damned if they don't with
Yeah.
the kind of rules they've set for themselves. I am not an economist. You are. Can you talk us through where we are, the kind of rock and a hard place that Labour's stuck in at the moment, and what you think some maybe
Yeah.
potential way out might be over the rest of this parliamentary term?
Yeah. And I'd be interested in what people on the chat think about this as well. So I'm a British journalist. I'm based here in London, where it is, I think, lighter than it is for you in Kiev. Um, I so let me give you how they see it. How do Labour see it? Labour came into power. They knew. I'm getting my own echo from your mic now, but I'll try
Okay.
and work through it.
Hang on,
They
I
they
can end that. Bear with me.
they came to power knowing that the public finances were pretty screwed and that they would have to do hard stuff first to try and fix that before they could do some of the rebuilding, some of the investment to boost growth. So that's what they thought they were going to do. I think the wider problem that they just don't recognize is, how can I put this? Capitalism is fucked. That's something you don't hear social democrats say a lot. I count myself as a radical social democrat. I don't want to overthrow capitalism violently. I want to deal with climate change. I want to deal with democratic decay in a peaceful manner. But the starting point has to be, since 2008, the debt overhang of 2008 hasn't gone away. And it's not just the absolute levels of debt. We're talking, 250, 300% of GDP in Japan, 100% here in Britain, uh, way more than that in, I think, 125% for the Americans, all headed northwards. Why? First of all, because we borrowed our way out of the post Lehman Brothers crisis. Capitalism isn't that dynamic anymore, despite all the things that we're all excited about. I'm presuming some tech bros on this Twitch. I've never used it before. We're all utterly excited about the technological progress that's being made, but it's not leading to economic growth. And then if you add into that the risk aversion of capitalism after 2008, we got these rules for bankers, Basel 1, Basel 2, Basel 3. They basically say to banks, don't invest in risky stuff. And so, adjacent to what we both cover, the defense industry and the war going on in Ukraine and in Israel-Palestine and now Israel-Iran, what should be happening is capital should be pouring into defense companies, and defense companies should be proactively investing, but they're not. The only people who are pouring money in are governments. And this tells me that the real problem Labour is dealing with is the fact that it's premised all of its. In fact, it's not even a sort of last 5 year issue. It's a last 100 year issue social democracy, centre-leftism, is premised on the idea that capitalism can become a positive sum game for everybody involved. So that even though I, as a worker, might get a pay rise, or a benefit recipient, or a recipient of disability benefits can get some more money, or get a little scooter to ride around on. That doesn't stop capitalism from prospering. But right now, we're sitting in a kind of capitalism that's becoming a zero-sum game. And I don't think progressive politics has ever faced that for 100 years. You've always had the prospect that maybe it will become positive sum in the future or the near future. Or if only we invest heavily, like say right now I'm heavily campaigning for increases in defense spending because I care a lot about, not living in a totalitarian dictatorship. But even if we do that, the headwinds to growth are going to be huge because of climate change, because of demographic aging. So the challenge for Labour is, what do you do? See, think about it like this. I'm a Labour Party member, we're faced with a radicalisation towards the right. There is a radicalisation towards the left and Islamism going on as well. We could talk about that. But the radicalisation towards the right is real. Now, when I meet a racist, I often think that's a zero-sum thinker. If I'm sat in the queue at my local doctor's and somebody starts going on, why are all these Portuguese people here? Why are all these people from Sao Tome and Principe here? Why are they in front of me in the queue? I always think this is zero-sum thinking, because you're not thinking, what job do they do? Are they a care home worker? Would their kid grow up to be the greatest footballer in English football history? You're not thinking of the positives. But the problem is, in a zero-sum game, some of these racist instincts and ethnicist instincts, they become kind of logical. And so politics in Britain, and I think it's going to be true in Europe, and maybe even in Ukraine once the war's over, for this foreseeable future, is going to be about who gets what, and how do we avoid pitting sections of the population against each other. So right now, you say, Oz, that Labour is in trouble with its own MPs because it's trying to do a welfare reform that stops the welfare budget eating everything else. And you've got the left in Britain saying, they've got this slogan, welfare, not warfare. So what they want to do is spend no extra money on weapons, no extra money on nuclear deterrence, and spend all the money on welfare. And what I say to them is, actually, the real choice is welfare, not healthcare. The only two big parts of the UK state budget are the healthcare budget and the welfare budget. And the welfare budget will grow forever because, quite rightly, medical science is discovering stuff that we didn't know about. We know about ADHD. We know more about autism and other neurodiverse issues. COVID is leaving behind a long trail, not just of long COVID, but, say, one of my friends works in this field, and unpublished research says all of us might be 5% less effective, less healthy because of COVID. Now, Labour's going to have to basically take the British population along a narrative and a story that says we're going to have to make some big choices. We can't sit here and let Putin, bully us. We've got Trump. They won't say this. Trump has effectively stabbed Europe in the back by walking away from deterrence and threatening to pull the plug on Ukraine. So we have to spend quite a lot of money on our own security and defense. And if the economy is not growing, that just does mean hard choices. And what surprises me, I'll let you jump in a minute, but what surprises me, Oz, is that, people who know my work know that I did try and become an MP. And I didn't succeed because Labour never selected me. But one of my complaints about this process is so many people who do become MPs have never studied politics. And if you do study politics like at the age of 16 in a British school, the first thing you learn is it's about choices. It's about interest groups saying, I want money spent on me and not you. And this has come as a bit of a shock to a lot of people on the Labour left, that they do have to make choices about defence, healthcare, schooling, law and order. And there's a kind of absence of political maturity. And what we're facing are right-wing populists who are just prepared to say to everything, End migration and the problems go away. End
So,
migration and we spend lots of money on healthcare. It's a lie, but people want to believe it because they're sick of, the terrible lives that a lot of them have to live.
well, also it was the same lie that was sold that Brexit would be the solution, because Brexit would end the immigration, and then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And
Yeah, I mean, it's become the narrative here in the UK has become very toxic about migration.
yeah.
Everything is about migration.
Well, I mean, look, we
Everything.
can get onto that in a moment. Before I wanted to go into that, I wanted to get to one of the questions that you're going to be asked a lot. Not just you, but the Labour Party will be asked a lot, which
Yeah.
is, why can't we just tax more? Why can't we just tax the wealthy more? And the tax burden in the UK is actually quite high. I mean, maybe not as high as it might be in other places of the world with different economic situations, but what is the tax situation like? How much more room do we have? The Labour are committed to not increasing taxes at the moment.
Well,
It seems that's going to have to change at some point,
yeah.
surely.
Yeah. They're committed to not increasing the main taxes on working people, which are income tax, VAT, and national insurance. I've said publicly that one of these three things has to change. Either they scrap that commitment and they start. No, we could come to wealth taxes and taxing the rich, but I'll come to that. But the big heavy lifting that you do when you raise tax in a developed world economy is eventually workers end up paying the tax, or it becomes a matter of struggle about whether the workers, you can tax their bosses, as the Labour already did. It raised a 20 billion a year tax on bosses. And people said, oh, you're just Tories, and the first thing they did, 20 billion a year on employers. Now, those employers will try and dump that 20 billion onto the lower wages of the workers, so it becomes a struggle. But in the end of the day, either they scrap the pledge not to raise taxes, or they scrap their own fiscal rules. And I would prefer the latter, because I think we're in a period of rearmament. You are sitting in a city that is being bombarded every night. If God forbid, London, where I'm sitting, was facing that, it would run out of all its air defences in the first 6 hours. So we have to build a massive stockpile. That's called rearmament. And I've studied quite deeply the 1930s, how UK rearmed. They tried a little bit to do it through taxing and a bit of borrowing. In the end, you can only do it through borrowing. You have to borrow a shit ton of money. The reason why all developed world states are now having to pay incredibly high interest rates for their government borrowing. If you can hear a sound, it's my dog scrabbling behind me.
Live broadcast.
Yeah,
the best.
live.
What's your dog's name?
Lottie.
Let's see her. Let's see Lottie.
Lottie.
Hello, Lottie.
Yeah.
There we go. We love a dog on the
She's
stream.
been missing me because I've been on holiday for 2 weeks, so we're just getting reacquainted. So look, rearmament you in the 1930s had to be done through borrowing, and we're going to have to do it through borrowing. But that's why the capital markets can charge states so much for the borrowing, because they know that everybody wants to do it, and they've been told not to be. They've been told to be risk averse, so they're just obeying the rules. And so as a result, Rachel Reeves, our finance minister, has to pay 5% interest rate on every £1 billion she wants to borrow. So they are in a bind, but in the end, if you combine, you see, we just had the NATO summit. What was that NATO summit about? You were talking earlier about Trump and
raising defence spending for all of the NATO members to 5%.
Yeah, and the 5% is 3.5% on armaments, and 1.5% on infrastructure. If anybody wonders what infrastructure means, look what happened to the Iranian Air Force when it didn't have hardened aircraft shelters. Building a hardened aircraft shelter out of concrete can be, a lot of kind of basically qualified workers can make a lot of decent money building the hardened aircraft shelters.
But concrete and steel is very expensive. That's kind of the issue, right? So
it is, but at the end of the day, there's all sorts you have to do. You know, there's a defunct place in the wilds of West Wales, which once was the place where all explosives were stored in the Cold War. I think that's going to have to be reopened for the very point you make. But look, the infrastructure plus the arms, if we do it right, and I did some work for Labour when we were in opposition on the design of a policy that they're now rolling through the civil service process. If we do this right and design in the growth strategy into the rearmament spending, you can have a big bang for buck. But the problem is, across the West, neoliberal finance ministries and civil servants, basically they've spent a generation telling themselves that military spending doesn't create growth. And my response is that we have to force it to create growth, and therefore we have to intervene kind of microeconomically. And if Ukraine's a great example. You'll be surrounded by people, making stuff in their garages, improvising, the fiber optic drone story. That in a country that's at peace, that has the luxury to be at peace and to think through, the first thing you do is you don't start building your drones, you start opening engineering courses for 16-year-olds so they know how to put a printed circuit board together. That gives you 2 years to design the plant. If we do that, I think there will be a success story to tell. But I'm not optimistic that when you observe a radicalization process such as the one that's happening in Britain and America, that everything becomes about racism. So even if there were loads of jobs suddenly created in like an English town that has been suffering for 30 years, the immediate question would be, why hasn't my son got one of those jobs? Why has that person of color got that job? And that's the toxic nature of the conversation.
So we'll just go on to, we got some user questions here. So we
let's have a look.
Arctic Falcon, who says, what do you think about defense investment as a way to achieve some of the growth we've lacked? And People's War saying taxing the rich doesn't yield much revenue for big, expensive, ambitious programs, whether that's welfare or defense. Where would you approach those?
Let's go taxing the rich. Taxing the rich has to be done through wealth taxes. So you literally raise, you say, well, if you keep your money in the UK, then it is going to be taxed. You can also tax luxury items. And I think you can, I think that ballpark figure about 50 billion. I think ballpark, you could raise 50 billion by cutting out loopholes, closing down the offshore conduits, all the places that the rich used to stick their money. But even that's if we're going to have to seriously rearm to deal with Putin and then China, that's not enough. So it's about generating growth. Now, that's where the Arctic Falcon asks, well, what do I think about defense investment? What has to happen is that you have to design the defense investment, and Labour spent a lot of time thinking about this, in such a way that it cascades over. I would say that, remember, here's the other thing. In the UK defense industry alone, we are 7,000 welders short.
7,000 welders.
That means
I know what to pivot into now after I leave.
Absolutely.
Ukraine.
If you're nuclear qualified and prepared to travel, and you can pass the security requirements, you can earn upwards of 50, 60K as a welder. No, that's probably,
I think
people
a lot of our streaming audience is thinking about a career in welding.
Before
we do, a big thank you to the subscription. My old band Mode Step has the happily given me a subscription. Really appreciate the subscription, guys. If you like the stuff, please do add a subscribe or follow my Ko-fi page, and you can give me a little love on over there. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. Sorry to interrupt you, Paul. Carry on.
So I'm using the example of the welders. But at the end of the day, one solution is retrain a lot of people. Unfortunately, it's easier to become a Deliveroo rider than it is to become a welder. But you've got to then get people to move to where those jobs are. But the other thing is to automate, to actually say, okay, well, come on, Jeff Bezos and Sam Friedman, get your arse in gear and invent something that will weld, that we don't need. No, apparently that's underway. But the point is, if we could find those 7,000 welders, we'd have to make sure that, for example, what's to stop them? What's to stop half of them being women? What's to stop um what's to stop them coming from places that really are never gonna, prosper, and just giving a huge leg up to places that have been just devastated by free market economics.
So
And,
I've
and
got a question for you,
yeah,
Paul.
go on.
So one of the big things about Brexit was it was really, we don't want more Polish people coming over to the UK, which was really, going back in time, it was an insane thing that we were having, because I saw my community be enriched by Polish immigration.
Mm.
And now, where I am in life, now working for the Polish state broadcaster, Poland is now one of the world's best performing economies. A lot of the Polish people back in the UK are packing up, they're going back to Poland. Poland is now doing, whether they have overtaken us or are expected to overtake us economically. It goes to show what hard work, in particularly in the kind of jobs that British people didn't want to do, and how that has now helped transform Poland economically. And do you think there are lessons that we can learn in Britain from the Poles?
Yeah, I mean, by the way, I think you're sitting in Ukraine. That story will be double, treble replicated once Ukraine is at peace, because it's not simply because Poles.
Yeah, I can't
Yeah,
absolutely can't wait.
Paul, it's not simply because Poles, came to Britain and did plumbing jobs and did van driving jobs. The fact is, if you go to Poland, there's very high. I hate the term human capital, but there's a very high human capital formation. That is, there's lots of programmers, there's lots of software engineers, there's lots of people who can indeed weld and fix a printed circuit board. And what we in my country, one of the only virtues of being my age, because I've lived through the collapse of Keynesian economics, the collapse of the good times, saw Thatcherism devastate economies, and that's an easy word to say, but what we never properly admit is that it produced two generations of people who kind of gave up a bit. And I've been a school teacher, and I will tell you, my fellow school teachers, their day in, day out problem in Britain is getting children to understand that there is something better than the shit job that they think they're going to be doing.
So
if they will,
can I throw something back at you here?
Yeah.
So I would probably consider myself a Keynesian, right? And I would argue that Thatcherism is the sort of antithesis to Keynesianism. And that Trussism was basically Thatcherism on steroids, except that Thatcherism was quite pro-Europe in the end. I would argue that we haven't had a real Keynesian style approach to the government, to economics, since Tony Blair's Labour Party. And I think that there are still obviously lessons that we can learn from that. But one of the things that I will put back to that is everything you said about where I am, where my generation is. I mean, so few of my friends have homes of their own. So many of them are, I'm still in my 30s. So many of them we're still in our 30s, clocking on now though. But so many of them are still at home with their parents and stuff, and it's crazy. It's like a lost generation of people that just are that there are loads with kids and are married and have homes. Don't worry, they exist. But the number of people that it's not because they're losers who haven't got on well in life. It's because the situation economically for them, even if they're earning £45,000 a year, that's still not enough to get them a home in London. So that's kind of my argument, I guess, against my own position. So talk to me as a Keynesian. Explain to me why my kind of outlook on economics hasn't worked.
Look, I think we have to. David Harvey, the Marxist economist, wrote a book called The Limits to Capital, and I think it's a great title. I'm not sure it's a brilliant book, but it's a great title because we have to accept that there are limits to capital and to capitalism, and one of them is what we're talking about now, which is human capital formation. If if you tell two generations of people that they're stupid and that they've got no future and that their best thing is that if they could work out how to become a Premier League football player or kind of a OnlyFans star, if that's what you tell working class people, what you end up with is you just don't end up with enough people who can do what's needed in a high value economy. So when you get a government, and Labour is committed to this, they want a high wage, high value economy. The fact is, it is for a young person turning up today with few qualifications, it's much easier for them to become a delivery rider than it is for them to go and say, well, I'm going to be a welder. And if you want to be a nuclear qualified welder, you're going to have to study. You actually have to do maths. No, we you use the example of Poland, and I'm in awe of the Ukrainians because a lot of these ex-Soviet countries or ex-Warsaw Pact countries have actually got generations and generations of engineers who want to be engineers, who understand engineering. We threw all that away. So it's all one of the frustrations I have with Labour politicians at the moment is that we've got two generations of kind of the political elite who think there's a technocratic fix to everything. Oh well, we're 7,000 welders short. Let's set up a scheme for it. They don't realise they're dealing with deep structural problems, and the limits to capital, one are people, and two is the climate. You know, the environment. We've destabilised the environment everywhere you go. I've just come back from Greece. I was speaking to a colleague who makes documentaries about just like lightweight travel documentaries in Greece. And he said you'd be surprised that everywhere they go in Greece, climate is the issue. Fishermen, no fish. Cow herders, grass is dying. Olive farmers, heat waves are killing the olives. And this is happening now. And what that means is that no matter how Keynesian you are in terms of your growth strategy, you can do all the right things. You're up against this wall of climate destabilization, and then you're up against aging. And we tend to think about demographic aging as simply how many people are retired versus how many taxpayers are there, and that's why we need positive migration. And I believe that. The problem is, at the same time, what we've underestimated is what we've already referred to: this devastation of the existing population by epidemics and by poverty-related diseases. And there are 4 million people of working age in Britain who can't work, according to their doctors. What are we supposed to do about that? I mean, you can have all the Keynesian stuff in your head, but in the end of the day, that creates an absolute barrier. So we have to. What I'm arguing at the moment is, you know, for the first time in probably 100 years, we have to start thinking about zero-sum socialism. Who gets what when things aren't growing so fast for the foreseeable future? Who gets what, and what do we concentrate on? And that's why, you know, if we don't win an argument about creating a single national narrative that everybody can sign up to, every ethnicity, every gender identity, what will happen is there'll become an identity-based struggle over who gets what. And then Farage will be happily down that track. Unfortunately, we've also got people on the left who want to go down that track. And to me, the task of sort of centre-left politics right now is holding together a single national narrative that people can buy into that isn't identity-based.
Right, let's have a look at the comments before we carry on with that. Yeah, completely agree. Youngsters are suffering from mass disillusionment. They really don't see the juice being worth the squeeze, and they would be correct. UK needs to build huge amounts of homes to tackle the housing affordability crisis. That is something that Labour is trying to do, while the blockers continue to try to block. Keynes does somewhat require the opposite of what has actually happened: investment in bad times instead of austerity, and sobriety with spending in good times to let private investments do its job. Yeah, I mean, look, we've had 14 years of the Tories, so they managed the economy quite poorly. I won't say they managed the economy poorly from the start of their rule to the end of it. There were different flavours of Tory government there. I do think that Boris Johnson coalition in 2019, which obviously couldn't hold and which Labour managed to cobble together, is the coalition that we end up spending most of our time talking about, the left behind towns older generation of voters who feel they don't recognize the country anymore, and Labour has been trying to pivot towards messaging towards them, to great success in the election, and to less success in recent days in the polls. Hi, Oz, been tracking Ukraine a bit less lately. How has the manpower situation developed? Last time I heard Michael Kaufman, it was the most pressing issue. I remember, the average age of soldiers at the moment. Is the front getting the priority? And yet, to give the UK some relevance, are we aware? Look, those issues are all ongoing. These are long-term issues for Ukraine. They still have a big pool of their younger population that they haven't started forcibly conscripting. That's because they have a demographic problem in Ukraine, that they have an aging population, just as we're talking about in the UK. We have an aging population without enough young people there to pay for them all. And this war is making that much more difficult for the Ukrainians going forward. Don't agree. Re-identity. The challenge is to build civic nationalism as an identity alternative to ethno-nationalism. Identity-free narrative doesn't work. You need a subject for the story you want to tell. I mean, look, I think there's been successes in that in Wales, in Scotland, but the solutions haven't really been forthcoming in Scotland. The SNP hasn't, Scotland hasn't taken off as an economic powerhouse because of the SNP. So, we're in a really rough spot, and growth really seems to be the issue, Paul. So back to you.
So
How do we generate growth?
But let me say about People's War, thank you. I agree with you. I'm not saying an identity-free narrative, but look like this. If you're a social democrat like me, you face in Britain, you face two tasks, two ways. You've got people who are giving up on politics from the left, who are basically saying, unless you can deal with climate change and unless you can deliver on my identity politics, I'm not interested. I don't care who runs the government. I'll quite happily let the Tories run it. Fuck Labour. So that's one problem. The other problem is the people who've gone to the right, and for them, everything is now pitched around ethnicity, migration, great replacement theory. Dealing with them, what I've tried to understand is that if you are, somebody who lives in this insecure world, the kind of white man band world, where everything is abrasive, everything is a conflict, every day is a struggle, you're basically looking at politics as change like this. In the past, this is putting it very, very crudely. If you strip away all the racist language, let's just focus on the logical core of their argument. In the past, there was a game based on class that we could win. That we could, if we organized ourselves as a class, you could get some redistribution, and we could get communities that were worth living in, that we could be proud of. You guys have changed the game to a game based on identity that I can't win, as the kind of white van man, white worker. So what am I supposed to do? Now, our answer to that is, and this is why I think that there is a socialist answer to this. Our answer to this is actually, you have a point here. So for us, the main game from now on is going to be based on class and redistribution. And we're going to talk religiously about British people, the working class, family, and community. And I don't see anything reactionary about that, because in the British people are all the incredibly vibrant ethnicities that have come together. I got off a plane at Gatwick this morning at the same time as a plane from the Caribbean full of Black British people came in, and it was just a joyous kind of moment to think, I live in this country, that can absorb and live with something my granddad's generation would have found really alien. And so, we have a lot to celebrate. We do know where we're going. We do know who we are. But I think we've got to emphasize the idea a bit more that what we have in common is what we're all going to fight for together. And actually, we're lucky in the sense that Putin has created an external threat that we do have to muck in together and meet. And one of my frustrations with Labour is that they're not quickly enough seizing that opportunity to bring people together around that threat and telling a national story. And part of that is to do with our institutions. We miss opportunities. The king's coronation, the king's birthday. What we do is we trot out, some, basically regiment after regiment whose officers send their kids to public school on the public expense, and we're not thinking about, let's put the real Britain on the streets to celebrate who we are. Because the elite still have to have their kind of march past of all, regimental seniority. This Guards regiment first, then that Guards, then the Royal Marines. By the time you've got to the steel band that comes at the end from the kind of school, down the road, it's very obvious that they're seen as the last in the parade. And I would like to basically put the British people to the forefront of every story we start telling now.
So let's round things off with, I said we'd talk a bit about the left and Ukraine. Paul, for those that might not know, Paul has been one of the most outspoken left-wing figures in the country in favour of Ukraine. That has made you quite unpopular at times. It's quite interesting to watch it happen to you, because that was the same thing that happened to me
you, didn't it, over Syria.
Over Syria, 10 years before. And the sort of attacks that very vicious personal attacks being put on you because of your outspoken and Paul was actually with me in Kyiv just before the war began. We had dinner at Whiskey Corner just down the road from where I live now. It was a very nice dinner as well, but that was just following Putin's speech. That's when we sat down.
We saw it. We watched the speech. We watched the speech
together.
The first speech on the 22nd when they annexed Donbass.
Yeah. So I remember that, and again, we were attacked for being there at all. It was really, really wild, and I don't think the left learned the lessons. There was kind of an automatic corrective period within the first week where everyone was like, oh, this is terrible, Russia needs to withdraw. They've stopped saying that. They've stopped even saying Russia needs to withdraw. That's no longer an issue when it comes to discussing what should be done in Ukraine. So look, give us your thoughts on that. Where have things progressed? I haven't been involved in the left for many years, but I haven't been involved in what's going on in the UK. You're still very prominent at the Ukraine solidarity marches and stuff.
Yeah.
Where are we now? Where are we with the trade unions? Where are we with the left in general?
So every year, me and my colleagues in the Ukraine Solidarity Campaign have to fight the same battle against the British far left, the tanky far left, who, unfortunately, because this is how unions work, it's very easy to become influential because most members aren't active. So every year, the usual suspects bring resolutions saying we should withdraw support from Ukraine, stop arming Ukraine, welfare not warfare. As I say, this kind of deluded idea that by stopping spending on military spending, we will in some way stop warfare. So we fight this rearguard battle. The British people, the communities, are incredibly generous and active towards Ukraine. So it's easy within civil society. It's hard within the labor movement because of the way that the Leninist groups, the neo-Leninist groups, tunnel in and basically use tiny amounts of influence to massive effect. But they're totally distracted by Gaza, and I am outraged at what is happening in Gaza. I'm outraged at Israel's conduct of that war. But what is now happening? You may have heard, and your listeners may have heard of this term, the omnicause. The omnicause has kind of taken over, and what it means is that if you're really pissed off about Israel on Palestine, then you're almost told that there's a set of beliefs that go with it, which is that you have to hate J.K. Rowling on trans rights, and you have to be indifferent to the fate of Ukraine because it's all NATO's fault. And anyway, didn't Putin offer a peace deal in Istanbul, and didn't Boris Johnson's
Well, I will add to that. Even if you agree with them on 9 out of 10 things, which I do, I do
yeah
agree with these guys often on many of these issues. But those issues that we disagree on, Ukraine, namely Syria, being the other one, Hezbollah, Iran, I could go on. But the ones, because we disagree on other things, whereas we might agree on trans rights or Palestine, we are still cast out as being
Yeah, because
effectively
the
traitors to
point is not the point is that the omnicause is not pick and mix.
Yeah.
It's and I'm sorry, the problem is with the omnicause is that it's being manipulated by the hybrid aggressors. It is right now being used by those who want to do us harm, because it's an open goal for them to
Jeremy
go in.
Corbyn had took on George Galloway's show on Press TV, and that's the mouthpiece for David Miller and Chris Williamson and so on and so forth. Now.
And just as much as we have to be
Totally
concerned,
active operations, like right in front of us.
right in front of us. And just as much as we have to be worried about right-wing radicalization, because once you're down the rabbit hole of like you say, the chemtrails and QAnon, you everything becomes a kind of, why hasn't the world blown up? Why there's a famous book about the Holocaust that said, why didn't, I think I'm quoting from memory, why did the heavens not fall? And it was a good question. Many Jewish people looked at it and said, why was there no divine retribution? But if you genuinely believe there is a great replacement invasion of Europe going on by people of color who want to destroy you wake up every day thinking, why have the heavens not fallen in? Why is there no revolution? Why is there no civil war? And what happens is you go down and down and down that path. I study the far right, and I sadly have to sometimes sit in chat rooms and see them making these reasons. What is happening now is that there are people on the left who are going in the same direction. One of the worst things that's happened to me this year, we went to a London defence conference. Yeah, fair enough. It's all bigwigs. It's invite only. There were 8 Ukrainian serving soldiers in uniform in that conference, all low ranks, all young people, all with they got tattoos and earrings, and the people outside, the Palestinian protesters, screamed at them, "Shame on you!" I mean, and they were just saying, the Ukrainians just said, I really admire them, because even if Putin paid me, a lot of money to stand outside this conference for 8 hours and scream at people, I wouldn't do it, because it's so boring. But they seem really dedicated, and but that's the problem with the omnicause. It's not that the individual bits of it aren't just. It's that if the moment you deviate from it, what happens isn't it just that spontaneously the spontaneous foot soldiers say, oh, that doesn't quite ring right with me, we have a go at him. No, it's far more sinister. The people pulling the strings target you. And as you say, Oz, I've been targeted, you've been targeted. Anybody who supports Ukraine actively and gets in the way of these operations is going to be targeted. That's the information war we're in.
But look,
and that's why.
Let's end it on a positive note.
Yeah, go on then.
There have been,
Ukraine is winning. That's a positive note.
Well, there have been successes when it comes to the British left and supporting Ukraine. Those voices, as loud as they may be able to broadcast, the Stop to War Coalition, etc., who are having a renaissance because of one thing that is bothering me is seeing people I know for years who don't like Stop the War Coalition are now very happy to march alongside them again because, of what's happening in the Middle East. Whereas personally speaking, I will never march alongside those people. But look, they've been losing on this issue of Ukraine. The Tories weren't interested in them, and the Labour Party now in government isn't interested in them. One of the questions we've had here in the chat is about reform. They are genuinely popular, but even reform are, apart from Farage, Tice, etc., being supportive of Ukraine is a very mainstream normie position, and the far left have lost that argument effectively so far, even with Starmer coming out with the coalition of the willing, and that being a policy that a lot of people are like, yeah, I'd support that. So the positive note I wanted to end on was that the actual wider left in the United Kingdom is supportive of Ukraine, and our strand of the left actually has been winning that argument, and you've been at the forefront of many of those,
Yeah,
campaigns.
I agree, and let's say this as well, that the 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 fact that the profile of Ukrainian people has been, of course, we see Zelensky. Of course, we have this kind of, we have a club of Ukrainian CEOs in London that meets in a gentleman's club. Kind of, I kind of could do with less of that. But the overall profile of the Ukrainian people that people here see is working class people, because that's who they are. It's a country of workers and oligarchs, and there's more of the workers. And when it, we've overcome all this stuff about the Azov Brigade, we've overcome all the disinformation, and now the Ukraine has done an incredibly good job at presenting its own people as the people that we are making direct solidarity with. Um, I've been particularly involved with the Welsh effort to do that, because there's the famous link between the country of Wales and the Donbass. So that's been an easy argument to make. But I think I'm going to sign off now, Oz, and let you get on with whatever you're going to do.
Thank you so much for joining us, Paul. I would love to have you back on the show again. And thanks to the audience who were really good crack there, and we got some good questions in. So, Paul, thanks so much for joining us. Take care and have a good
night. Pleasure. Take care.
Say hi to Lottie as well.
Will do.
So there we go. Thank you so much. That was Paul Mason. That was the first guest on the first episode of the Oz Katerji Show. Had this studio made up especially, so that's taken a while to get going. I wasn't expecting to get hundreds of viewers in at one time, and that's an incredible success. Thank you so much. I'm blown away by that, blown away by the support. If you want to show your love, please feel free to my Ko-fi link over here. You can buy me a coffee or two. That would be really appreciated. Big thank you to subscribers. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I've gone to some lengths to make these little things that I can press and bring up. Very proud of them. If you want to follow me on socials, they're here. Although you probably already follow me on those socials. But thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. Josh, thank you. My old bandmate, Josh Modestep, who is also a Twitch streamer. I really appreciate the support, mate. Thanks so much. It's really great to hear from you. Jason of Death, thank you. Thank you, Liquid Amber. Thank you, .ks. This is much better than the Legion Go. Yeah, I bought a new computer. So we're running on good hardware now. Thank you. Listen, I'm going to keep doing this weekly. Every week we're going to get some really interesting guests on. Try and get an Iranian guest on for you next week. And I'll keep you posted. So thanks so much. I hope to see you on the next one. And have a great night, guys. Good night. Thank you so much.